So today, let's get started. Just to give you a sense of what we're going to be covering today, Stephen's going to start out sharing some of the basics of camera trapping and equipment, such as camera settings. After he goes through some of those real core points, we'll have a break for some questions. We'll take a few there. Then he'll share with us some setup techniques and choosing the right spot, what goes into that. Then we'll have another break for some of your questions. Then he'll cover servicing the camera. So once you've got it set up, some things you should keep in mind when you visit it to collect your pictures. Picture management. So what does that look like once you get all the pictures, downloading, naming? He will then also share with us a little introduction to WPI, which is our acronym for the Wildlife Picture Index. That is our camera project at Pepperwood. And then lastly, we will wrap up with a final Q&A section. And we'll also share at that point this idea of having a class Dropbox after this as a way for us to kind of stay connected and share some of your wildlife pictures that you're collecting when you go off and start your own project and camera after this. So, well, Stephen will talk about that a bit at the end. And last but not least, that brings me to introduce Stephen Hammerich. So Stephen is our wildlife specialist at Pepperwood. He has 8 years of experience with wildlife camera trapping. He has his bachelor's from Sonoma State in environmental studies, specializing in conservation and restoration. He grew up on a small farm in Northwest Santa Rosa and has always had a connection to the land. Stephen was first introduced to Pepperwood in 2010 through the classes he was taking at the Santa Rosa Junior College, and the preserve just captured his interest, so he immediately became one of our volunteers. After taking the California Naturalist classes at the SRJC, he became a Pepperwood steward, so that's one of our very dedicated volunteers, and he was working on our wildlife camera project through that role. And he is now a member of our staff. He coordinates our volunteers, manages data and equipment, and performs field work, all related to our Wildlife Picture Index research project. Since he has since graduated from the SRJC and then on to Sonoma State, he's got his bachelor's now, and in his free time, when he's not hiking around checking out cameras, he also enjoys hiking on and off trail in our local hills. All right, Stephen, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Holland, for the introduction. Welcome, everybody, to Pepperwood's Do-It-Yourself Camera Trapping Workshop. I'm glad everybody could be here today. This here is a collage that I put together when I first started giving presentations at Pepperwood. So this slide is many years old, and it still seems to follow me wherever I go when I'm doing a presentation. But this has a couple of some of the wildlife we see at Pepperwood. All right, so camera trapping. Let's get started. So what is camera trapping? Well, you know, we detect wildlife, and of course we get some really interesting photographs. We can determine the presence and absence of species on the landscape. We can detect and determine if a particular species favors a certain habitat or not. And also, we'll certainly be able to see behaviors on different animals, whether they're interacting with each other or if they're just kind of doing their own thing. So I'll start here with my favorite picture ever. This is a bear picture from, it's actually in Healdsburg at Modini Preserve. There's a property just north of that my friend Richard owns, and this is a camera from the WPI Wildlife Picture Index that's actually on his property. And I really like this. It's you know, of course, it's an adult bear. It's got some scarring, and it really speaks to the resilience of wildlife in our community. Also, I'm going to be talking about different angles of cameras positioning. You can see that this camera is actually angled at about a 45-degree to the road there, and so that's one of the pictures that you'll get when you set a camera up in that position. This is a video that Richard took. I didn't take this, but I really liked it and I thought I should share it. This is in Healdsburg also. Isn't that amazing? As you can see, this video was taken on a Brownian camera. So Brownings actually take pretty good images too, and videos. So let's jump right into it. Camera trapping. First of all, there's camera selection, and that can kind of be determined by your budget, and also really what you want to do with the camera. Do you want to take pictures? Do you want to take videos? Do you want to take both? Are you interested in time-lapse pictures? Time-lapse is if you were to set your camera to take a picture at a particular time of the day. I use this feature for some of the cameras that I have set up on our construction rebuild at Pepperwood. So there's some really, really good cameras on the market today, and TrailCam Pro is a really good resource for looking at field testing reviews. They test a lot of different cameras and they post their reviews. So even if you're not there to purchase something, it's a great resource to go and learn about cameras and how the different cameras function. I myself have used Bushnell's, several different models, the Brownings, Reconyx, HCO Spartan, and the Scout Guard. So those are really the cameras that I can speak to with my experience. Most cameras today are PIR, which is passive infrared sensing. And with those particular models, you can get a low glow or a no glow. A no glow might be something that you would favor if you want to use it for more security reasons, so you didn't want somebody to see the flash. Cellular is a new feature now, new to me anyways, and I'll talk a little bit about the one that I have set up. And then there's also an incandescent camera, which will take a white flash at night. This one will give you a nighttime color picture, whereas the infrared will just give you a nighttime black and white picture. But it's really bright and it tends to really startle the animals. So you might wonder, well, what kind of battery should I use? You know, alkaline, lithium, or rechargeable? You know, what's the difference? For myself, I've started with rechargeables, and then I was starting to have problems with them. And after reading through the Bushnell camera instructions, I determined that they suggest that you don't use rechargeable batteries in their units. And of course, this was several years ago. So I switched to alkalines, and that really solved a lot of my problems with my cameras. And most recently, with the new Bushnell Core and Core DS cameras that I've been using, they reduced the amount of batteries in the camera from the 8 that I was used to 6 batteries. So at that time, I switched to lithium batteries so that I could get more life out of the camera with fewer batteries. Here's a couple of cameras that I'm using now, and I'll be using these as kind of a comparison. The camera on the left is a Core, Bushnell Core, which is about $140, and the Bushnell Core DS on the right is about $200. They both have their good features. There are differences between the two, and I'll be able to illustrate that on some of the pictures that I'm going to show you. Here's some features on the front of a camera. You know, if you're new to camera trapping and you're not really familiar, this is a really great place to start to get to know your camera and what these different features do, so that you're familiar with them. You know, it has the lens and the PIR sensor and the motion indicator. There's several things going on here. On the right detail, you can see that it's a bottom view of the camera. In this particular model, the battery tray drops out of the bottom. It also has a threaded socket on the bottom for mounting that to brackets. I'll show you a little bit of that later too. And it has an auxiliary port for plugging in DC or solar panel. So, you know, it's really good to get to know your camera, to get to go through the settings, you know, put your batteries in there, your SD card, turn it on, and just experiment to see what kind of features are there. The top left illustration is an LCD display, And this is what you might see when you turn your camera on. It's set to camera mode. So there's little icons on there that indicate what's going on with that camera and what particular settings are set. On the top left, you can see that there's a little camera icon, and that means that the camera is set to camera mode and not video mode. The next image size, and that's your resolution or your megapixels. The next one shows the SD card. That means that you have a card installed, which is really important if you want to get the pictures. And then to the right of that is the battery level, which will indicate how much battery level is still in your camera. If you go down to the left of what the date is, you'll see a thing that says timestamp, and it's a little circle with a T on it. That's what you'll get when you turn the timestamp on for your images, and that's where you'll get your date and your time and some other things that'll be printed actually on your images. The date and the time. On the bottom left is the number of pictures taken, and on the bottom right is the remaining available space. So the detail to the right of that is what you would see if your camera was set to video, and it has some of the same similar features, except for now it has a video camera and it shows your video resolution. On the bottom left is an SD card. This is one of the cards actually that I'm currently using with my project. When we first started, we had 2 GB, and then we were using 8 GB for quite a while. And now we're using the 16 GB cards with our project. If you're not familiar with cards, there's actually there's a classification on SD cards, and basically it's the read and the write speed. And if you see to the right of the 16 GB, there's like a little half circle with a number in it. That actually indicates that this is a 10 megabytes per second read and write speed. Bushnell suggests that you use a minimum of 6, but I like to go with a 10. That way I know that my SD card is not the limiting factor for the way my camera is going to perform. And then to the right of that, we have the detail for the setting buttons, for going through settings, for turning your camera on and off, and how you go through settings. Camera settings are something I think that intimidate a lot of people. There's a lot of different functions. There's different things to do. Of course, there's some that are very straightforward. So the first setting is your set your date and your time. The next setting is mode. And this is where you can set your camera to camera mode, which will include time lapse, and also you can set it to video, or you can set it to hybrid. If you set it to hybrid, the camera will take pictures and then a video simultaneously. Night vision shutter. This is a feature that's available in this particular Bushnell Core model that it does not have an adjustable flash. And so what they've done is they've included this so that you can adjust the shutter speed for your night vision. And the slower the speed, the more exposure it gets, and the more blurring you're going to get. So if you're getting a lot of quick animals going through, you're going to probably want to set it to fast motion. And if it's a really large setting in front of the camera, you might want to set it long range. The next setting is image size. And these two particular models both have 3 and 8 megapixel. The Core has a 24 megapixel option, and the Core DS has a 30 megapixel option. When you start adjusting megapixel side, it does affects the resolution of the picture, but it also affects the capacity that's still available on your camera. And so if you set your megapixel really high, your SD card is not going to be able to hold as many pictures. I actually use this feature to limit how many pictures my cameras take that are set up on my project. The next feature is capture number, and this is you can set from 1 to 5, and this determines how many pictures the camera takes when it's triggered. The next feature is camera name, and this gives you the option to actually name your camera, and then when you have your it'll print it on your picture if you want it to. More settings. So video, I'm not an expert on video, so I'm not going to go into any great detail here. Probably some of you folks are more familiar with this than I am. I do have a few cameras set on video, and I usually set it either to 720 or 1080. I do have the video sound on, as you saw in that early bear video, that the sound was on for there, and you could actually hear that bear when it was getting close to the camera. Video length is for these is 5 seconds to 1 minute, and of course the longer you run your video, the more space it takes up on your card. You probably want to use a bigger card when you're going to be doing a lot of video, like a 32 gigabyte card. And there's also a feature, it's called dynamic. And when I first saw that in the instructions, it was a bit confusing to me. But basically what it's saying is that the camera will continue to take video as long as it's being triggered, which means if you set your video to 20 seconds and there's still action in the frame, that the camera will recognize that and continue that video beyond the 20-second that you set your video for. So you won't lose some pretty interesting stuff. The next setting is interval. This is the length of the time that the camera will take to arm itself and be ready to take another picture. This can be anywhere from 0 seconds, I think, up to like a minute. The next setting is format or delete, and this erases or formats the card, the SD card. And Bushnell suggests that if you're using your card in other cameras, that when you put it into your Bushnell, that you format your card. Always make sure that you've saved your images before you're doing this. I've actually done this before and lost some images, and I think once you make this mistake, you're probably not likely to make it for quite some time. So this will be the last of the settings. Sensor level is one that gets, I think, changed a lot on different cameras depending on location. This particular model has an auto, a low, a normal, and a high. When you set this to auto, the camera will actually determine by temperature, surrounding temperature of the camera, what it's going to set the camera to. So if it's above 70 degrees, it's going to set the camera to high, and if it's between 45 and 70 degrees, it's going to set the camera to normal, and if it's below 45 or below, it's going to set it to low. Once it sets this, then the camera, if it's set to high, will reach out about 70 feet. That's your trigger distance, and your normal will be about 100 feet, and your low will be about 40 feet. Setting to auto is probably a pretty good idea, especially where we're at in California, because we can start out with some really cold mornings, and then as it warms up through the day, it can get pretty hot in the afternoon. So you might want the camera to be determining those settings for you. I have had better luck with just setting it to low, normal, or high, and adjusting it kind of through the year and different times when the vegetation's growing. The next setting is timestamp, and this is where it'll imprint the date and the time on your video or your pictures. And for the pictures, it'll also imprint the current temperature, the moon phase, and if you've named your camera, this is where you'll see that your pictures will then have your camera name imprinted on the bottom. The next mode, or the next setting, is camera mode, and this you can either do 24 hours day or night. I've set mine to 24 hours because I kind of want to know what's going on all the time around my cameras. But if someone prefers just to take day pictures or night pictures, then that option's available for them too. The next setting is default. And so once you select this, it'll restore the camera to the original factory settings. This is probably helpful if you've made a bunch of adjustments to your camera and it's not really performing the way you want it, and you want to kind of start over. This is a great feature. You just press this and it's going to reset itself, and then you can start to make your adjustments from there. The last setting is actually just the version, and it displays the current firmware that camera has. This is by no means all of the settings, but I think we covered most of them here. So that was a lot to digest. At this time, we're going to take a minute or so to field any questions. So if you have any questions, Helen will be able to follow up with those.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So at this point, if you've got questions that have come up for you, you can either type them into the chat box, or I realize I don't think I described where to find the raise hand icon. earlier. So another option, if you want to share your question using your voice, near the participant list. So if you can find the participant list in your Zoom window, you might need to click the icon that says participants for it to show up. You will see in that area some icons like a raise hand, a yes, a green yes check mark, a no X. And if you raise your hand in there, I can see it on my list here, and I'll know you have a question that you'd like to share using your audio, and then I can unmute you. I see we've got a couple questions coming in the chat. Okay, so Katerina is wondering, is it possible to install a wildlife camera at a public park? Any idea of where to ask for a permit? So a little bit of background from Katerina's question. They have a small group of volunteers that have adopted a spot in a public park that they want to take care of, and they're seeing lots of wildlife there. So they're wondering where to start.
Yeah, great question. So you'd want to start with whoever's authorization has that park. So if it's the county park, you want to start with the county. If it's a state park, you certainly want to talk to the people at the state. Certainly want to get permission before you put any cameras on public property, because there becomes this thing about getting pictures of people and not having their authorization. Another thing that the concern would be for putting a camera in a public place is security. So you're certainly going to want that camera in a lockbox, and you're going to want it secured for sure.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And Martha is wondering, how often do you find yourself changing batteries?
Yes, and that's really determined by the camera location, the time of the year, how many pictures that camera is taking. And so I service my cameras every 6 weeks. And so I can go probably more than 3 months before my batteries start to drop down. I do change my batteries out when they're down to 1 bar, because the next level is 0, and that means that camera is going to stop functioning. So for my purposes, I change them probably about every 4 months, I would say. And that's the alkaline. I'm just now starting to get going with the lithium, and so I'm really starting determining how long those are lasting for me, and they seem to be doing really well.
Okay, it looks like we've got a couple more questions we'll take, and then after these we'll move on and we'll have other opportunities for questions. So Scott is wondering, if you were to focus a camera on a bird feeding station, what would you recommend as some favorable settings for that?
Okay. Yeah, with that question, one camera comes to mind, and that's Bushnell's Nature View. And this actually is a camera that comes with a couple of different lenses. One is for close-up, and they're really, TrailCam Pro has tested this camera, and they're saying that for people that are looking to get bird pictures or close-up pictures, this is really a good one. You might think that I'm plugging Bushnell and TrailCam Pro, and I'm not saying that so much to promote their product, but that's the resources that I've used, and the Bushnell cameras are cameras that I've used from the very beginning.
Okay, great. And Bob is wondering if you could discuss a little bit more about the infrared options, low glow compared to no glow.
Sure. The PIR is a sensor that determines heat. The low glow, when the camera takes its picture at night, you'll actually visually see a little red glow on the LEDs when it flashes. The no glow is a camera that you don't see any flash at all when it takes its picture. So it doesn't really give itself away at night. My experience, because I do have a couple of no glows, is that the pictures tend to be a little bit darker because of that. And so those are pretty much the two features for the PIR.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. At this point, we'll continue on, and please just continue sharing your questions with us in the chat. You can type those in there at any time as they come up, and then we'll share them during the Q&A. Yeah, great.
Well, great. Well, thank you for the questions, and let's continue. So now I'll talk about the side-by-side comparison that I've been able to do with the two cameras that I most recently started using, and that's the Bushnell Core and the Core DS. When you first get a camera, you really want to set it up and get some pictures with it. I like to do some full light testing, some medium light testing, and then some dark or nighttime pictures. Here's two pictures that I took inside the Dwight Center, down where my desk is. And you can see that the top right picture, the Core, is actually a pretty good picture. The color's pretty good. The light's shining through the window, so you kind of expect it to be a little bit light. The bottom left is the Core DS. This picture is actually a little bit overexposed and a little bit too light. Another thing that I discovered when I set these cameras up side by side is that the angle view is different for both of them. The Core actually takes a wider and a more vertical image, whereas the Core has a narrower angle and a shorter vertical distance for the picture. So that's probably something I really wouldn't have discovered had I not set these cameras up side by side and tested them. Here's an outside full daylight test. This is in our courtyard at Pepperwood. The top picture is the Core. It takes a pretty good picture. The color is just a little bit off. The bottom picture is the Core DS. This has a little bit better color in the picture. You can see that the pumpkin has a brighter orange and my shirt is more blue. Something that I can't really illustrate here is on these two pictures, the top one, if I were to zoom in closer to the top picture, it would start to pixelate pretty early on, and I wouldn't be able to see what's really far in the back there. However, the bottom picture is actually, I can zoom in pretty far with that and all the way to the back of the picture and see very clear what's in that picture. This is important for me because the purpose of my pictures is to detect wildlife. And quite often, my wildlife is kind of off at a distance. And by being able to zoom in really close, I can really get a 100% identification on a different species. So that's something to consider if you want higher resolution or better clarity. Then probably you want to go with the more expensive camera. Here's a nighttime testing. This is down in our mechanical rooms downstairs at the Dwight Center. And the top picture is actually pretty good. The flash is pretty good on that. The bottom picture is a little bit overexposed, so I probably had the flash set too high on this. You can actually see the difference in the two depth of the cameras too, because these cameras were both set up, like I say, in the same place, and one of them puts me further back and one of them puts me closer. Here's our final nighttime picture, and this is in a little bit darker setting downstairs underneath the Dwight Center. As you can see, the top picture kind of gives me more of a hallway effect and is a little bit dark. The bottom picture actually has a really good flash, and that's about what I hope to achieve when I'm setting my camera up. And you can see that the bottom picture is certainly more clearer than the top. I've also been experimenting with a cellular camera. I purchased the 7000 series Moultrie, and I've been really happy with my findings on this. Actually, this has been kind of my window into the preserve, all this shelter-in-place thing, and so because it's cellular and I'm able to look at the pictures almost in real time, then I'm able to like do a little visit to the preserve. It's been really cool. So this is actually a picture that I retrieved off the card from the camera. So this isn't necessarily the clarity of the picture that I see when I look at the dashboard on the Moultrie's website. Here's a nighttime picture of that same camera. It actually is a pretty good flash. It's a really good clear picture. I'm happy with both of those. And here's the dashboard that I see when I go to Moultrie Mobile, which is online. So the way that the cellular works is that I purchase a cellular camera, whether it be AT&T or Verizon, and then I purchase like a phone plan, like you would for your regular cell phone, which gives me the service. And then the website is free. I just create an account, and then I then I can go to this website and I can open my account, and this is what I see when I first open it up. And I can look at different pictures. I can look at my account. I can actually change settings on my camera remotely. So if this is a camera that I'm not visiting very often and the batteries are really good, then it's a really neat feature that I'm able to make changes in some of those settings that we talked about earlier without even going to the location. Here's some illustrations of some setup hardware that I'm going to be showing you. The top left is a T-post bracket. This bracket is actually plastic, and I'm not as happy with it as I thought I would be, but I'm using a bunch of those on our forest wildlife monitoring project. The top center is the nylon strap that all cameras come with, and most people use those. They're really good for securing on trees and around posts and things like that. The top right bracket is the lag bolt style, and it also has a ball swivel feature in it. So you can screw this into the wood or a post, and then you can also adjust your camera to different angles. The bottom left is a T-post bracket, or also can be used for a steel pipe, I think up to about 1 inch. And this has multiple adjustments on it. The arm swings back and forth, and it also a ball swivels up and down. The bottom or the center is the Python lock that's used for the security box. On the bracket on the right is a bracket that gets lag bolted to a post or wood, and then you can actually mount your security box onto this bracket, and it also has a feature where you can swivel it. So the next 3 videos are going to be ones that I took to show actual field setups and how these different brackets work. So here's a couple pictures of what I had for setup. So the one on the left are lag bolts, and then screwed into the wood. The center one's a T-post, and then the one on the right is that one that can go on a T-post or a pipe. And here's the video.
Stephen, we're not getting audio. I think under your screen share menu, you can choose share computer audio on the little menu there. Bear with us as we have a technical difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where it's at.
Yeah, I think you might have to maybe stop sharing your screen and then re-share your screen.
Okay.
And when you reshare, click the share computer audio. There you go. And let's try this again.
Oh, this is not good.
Might be able to click back a slide and then forward again to restart it.
You're able to point it in any direction you want.
Good.
And I brought you back down to the creek to show you a couple more mounting options for your wildlife camera. We're still using the security box and the Python lock, but now we've mounted the box to the post with a nylon strap. The upper camera is just now mounted to the post with a nylon strap also. You might need to put sticks behind your cameras to get the desired angle that you want, because you can no longer swivel them like you can with the other brackets. We're back down at the creek and I'm showing you the last 2 mounting options. The one on your left, my right, is for a T-post, and it's a mounting bracket that'll hold your camera. It can swivel both back and forth, and it can also tip down and up. This bracket that's closest to me is for a round pipe or a T-post, and it has an adjustment where you can go up or down on the pipe. It has another bracket where you can swing different ways, and it also has one more feature where you can tilt the camera up or back down.
All right, continue with setting up the camera. What I like to do is I like to look for signs of sign and scat. Animal trails are a really good place to set up your camera, and so are dirt roads. You probably won't see maybe these in your backyard, but certainly when you get like maybe down to a creek or a little bit off the trail, you might certainly see some of these things. The image on the left is a Sergeant Cypress that the black bear in Sonoma County really likes to mark, and so this tree certainly has some bear activity on it. The top center is a picture with my hand in it is a bear paw print, and if you look to the right of that, the top right where that wooden stake is, that's actually a scratch mark where a mountain lion actually did a scratching there and then marked. The bottom center is a tree that likely was scratched by a bear, and on the bottom right is just a huge pile of bear scat. It's always good to look for sign and scat. It's really going to help you when you set up a camera to determine is this a good place? Is there stuff going on here? Or is it just a random location? So setting up the camera, once you kind of found your spot, I found it's important to get your compass out and determine which direction is north. You really always want to set your camera up in the most northerly direction that you have. In the summertime, or excuse me, say in the wintertime when the sun is lower in our horizon, the southern exposure is a problem for setting up your camera too, because you'll be facing into the sun. However, when it gets more to the summertime and the sun is more overhead as it passes through, both in the north and south directions are actually pretty good directions for setting up your camera. What you really want to avoid is the east and the west directions where the sun rises and the sun sets. If you set your camera up into the sun, it's most likely just going to get washed out. Closed canopy areas are a really great place to set up your camera. If there's a lot of leaves in the trees and there's some shade in there, you can actually set your camera up in just about any direction you want. So that's a really great option. Setting your camera up, you really want to avoid setting up where there's a lot of vegetation and where the wind can blow things and trigger your camera. And I always like to trim the grass wider than the angle of the camera view. So actually, the trigger view on your camera is wider than the actual picture view itself. And so as the animal's starting to pass in front of the camera, it knows a little bit ahead of time that it's going to take a picture. And so when it does take the picture, your wildlife ends up more in the center of your frame. So therefore, you're going to want to trim wider than your picture because that grass off to the side is actually going to trigger it. Whenever I set a camera up, I like to use the motion indicator LED that comes with most cameras, and it's part of this. You can use it for setup. And so once you set your camera up, you turn it to setup, and then you can walk out a distance away from the camera, pretty far distance. And as you start walking towards the camera, when the LED starts flashing, you'll know you're within the detection range. So you can kind of determine how far out the camera is going to detect you. And you can also come in from the left or the right side of the camera. And then once you're in the detection range, the LED will, again, light up and flash. So this will give you an indication of where your target area is and if you've set it up exactly where you want it. When I'm in the field, I'm usually quite a ways off the trail, away from anything. And so I always like to check my images when I first set up. And I use both of these. The bottom left is a viewer, which is pretty straightforward and pretty easy to use. You just plug your card in and you can scroll through your images. I kind of prefer to use a tablet because it has a bigger screen. So this tablet here has a card reader plugged into the left side of it, and then it has an SD card plugged into that. This always is with me in my backpack, and so I can always check to make sure cameras are working. When I'm out there and I'm visiting them, when I'm doing the service part of it. Here's some more setup. So this is some of the setups that I have. So this top left one, can you find a camera in that picture? Because the grass got a little tall and it got away from me. So I'm gonna move my cursor around, and that's the camera right there on a 1x3 wooden stake. And the vegetation has overgrown it. This is what you want to avoid. Because I don't visit my cameras for sometimes 6 or 8 weeks at a time, the grass will have a chance to grow, and so I have to get out there and trim that vegetation. The top center picture is a typical setup for my project. A camera on a 1x3 wooden stake driven into the ground, and as you can see, I've trimmed the grass pretty good in front of it, so that'll work out good for hopefully until I'm able to return to that camera. The vegetation will still stay pretty short. The picture on the right is my actual setup for my mulch camera that's at Pepperwood. This one's strapped to a tree and it's up a little bit higher. My cameras that I'm using for my project are usually about 24 inches off the ground. The picture on the bottom left is of a setup at my project in Healdsburg. This camera is actually on a tree because it was so rocky there I couldn't drive a wooden stake in the ground. And the camera I set above that is set on video, and so that's a Browning. And so at this location, I'm actually getting still pictures and video. And this location is actually really special for us because this is where we got a picture of a ringtail. And over the 8 years that I've been camera trapping, we have one series of 3 pictures of a ringtail. So that's a spot that I certainly want to keep a good surveillance on. Picture on the bottom middle is again like the setup I did down at the creek. So when you're setting up your camera, there's a couple ways you can set it up. You can set it up at a right angle to the trail, like the picture in the top right is, where you're going to see either the left side or the right side of the animal as it passes through. Or you can set your camera up kind of in line with the trail. So there's the one on the top left, there's actually a trail that comes forward through and to the left of the camera. And there's also a trail that goes from where this bear is over across and out this way. So this is one of those spots where I found a location where 2 trails converge. And that's just that's a great place to set up your camera because you know that there's more activity there and there's a good chance you're gonna get different angles of the wildlife. The bottom left is a picture of a road. And like I said, roads are really great places to set up cameras. Wildlife use them as they do trails. And so if you set up your camera at a right angle, you would just be across the road. This is a pretty short target distance, but you're going to see a side view. You can set your camera up at a little bit of an angle across the road, and then you're going to see a little bit of an angle there, or you can set your camera up in line with the road, and then you're either going to get an animal coming at you or walking away from you. The bottom right is the picture of a fox. And this is the same location as the picture in the top left, and this fox is actually coming across in front of the camera. Okay, that was a lot of information. So at this time, we're gonna take a few minutes for questions.
Great, thanks, Stephen. We got a couple questions while you were talking, and so I will read these off and also invite you to, you can enter your questions in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand icon near the participant list if you want to share your question with your voice. Whoops, what did I just do? Let me scroll down. Okay, so we've got a question, which is a couple questions about the cellular camera. So Dan is wondering, what are the price ranges for the Moultrie cellular cameras?
Okay, so this particular model I actually got on sale, and I think I paid about $150 for it. So that was the initial cost of purchasing the camera. And the plan, you have different plans for service. The plan I'm using is the least expensive one, and it's about $10, and I can take up to 850 pictures in a 1-month period. So if I start getting a lot of pictures, I have to upgrade and pay a little more. But for $10 a month, I think is a pretty fair price. 850 pictures is a good count for a 1-month type of thing. Of course, you can go quite a bit higher than that and pay more for more pictures or multiple cameras.
Okay, thanks. And another question about the cellular cameras. Debbie is wondering, does the plan have to specifically be through AT&T or Verizon, or were those just the examples you gave?
Yeah, no, great question. Those are the two, I think, the major phone company services that are providing service for this. There might be other ones, but where I purchased the camera, those were the two options that were available, were AT&T and Verizon. So I wouldn't know if other carriers are part of this as well.
Okay, we'll take a couple more here. Ben is wondering, how do you decide when to use a wooden stake instead of attaching the camera to a tree?
Yes. There's a lot of different ways you can set up your camera. I use wooden stakes because that's part of the protocol for the Wildlife Picture Index the project that I'm working on. But also, if you're out in the middle of a grassland and there isn't any place to secure a camera to, then a wooden stake is a pretty good option. You just carry a mallet with you and you drive it in the ground, and then you can mount your camera to it. I do use trees when they're available. It just becomes a little tricky to get the right angle on it sometimes, unless you're using some of these adjustable brackets.
Excellent. And Bob is wondering, are the camera lenses auto or fixed focus?
They're fixed. They're a fixed focus, with the exception of the Bushnell Nature View, which is a camera that you can actually switch the lens out for one that's close up. But other than that, when you set it up, the distance that you set up is the picture that you're going to get, and it's not going to focus any closer.
And Ben is wondering, this is a question related to Pepperwood's use of the cameras in particular, is there an interest to use more cellular cameras at Pepperwood in substitution of the current non-cellular cameras?
Yeah, we've actually certainly been considering this and seeing if it's a good option. One of the limiting factors that we have for our project at Pepperwood is that we use cameras that have like a 1/4 second trigger speed and then a recovery speed of less than a second. So what that means is that when something goes in front of that camera in 1/4 of a second, it's gonna take that picture, and then in less than a second, it's gonna rearm and it's gonna be able to take another picture. The cellulars are a little bit slower, and actually a lot of the cameras have a longer trigger speed and a slower recovery speed. And that's one thing that if you really want to get to the nitty gritty, you can go to TrailCam Pro, and their reviews have all that information, and you can find out which cameras are the fastest and which cameras are not quite as fast.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And there's a couple other questions in there, which I think will be best for us to hold for the end, our final Q&A section. So if you didn't hear your answer there, I did see them, and we will get to your questions after Stephen has shared some more information with us. So we'll have you continue on, Stephen.
All right, thank you, Holland, and thank you for the questions. Servicing the camera. This is the part that everybody can't wait to do. I know I certainly can't. It's when you go out there and you get to retrieve that data from the cameras. Whenever I'm approaching any of my cameras, I always kind of go in slow and I make observations. Again, I'm looking for sign and scat. I'm looking for any disturbances in the ground, or I'll kind of monitor, how's the vegetation doing? Is it overgrowing? Should I have come sooner? Should I have serviced this camera sooner and done more vegetation management? And is the camera up? Is it down? I find cameras in all different states, whether they're a little bit skewed to the side or that they're laying on the ground, they get knocked over. And so I suggest that you walk in front of the camera so that it's actually taking your picture when you approach it. I use what's called a whiteboard when I'm approaching the camera, and basically I put it out in front of the camera, and it has the date and the time and the camera location. I do this when I first set up a camera before I leave, and I do this when I come to visit the camera to collect the card. That way I know that my time and date are still correct on my cameras, and I have kind of, you might say, bookmarks for each end of the data set. So it's pretty straightforward when I check a camera. I come to it and I open the cover. First thing I do is I switch it to off, and then I switch it up to setup. This is something that's suggested with the Bushnell cameras for sure, is that Whenever you're changing your on and your off and your setup, to always go to off first and then back up to setup, or back up to turn it on. The camera just likes that better. Also, I'll note the camera date and the time against actual time. I'll record the pictures taken. I'll check the battery level, and then I'll take the old card out. I like to use a little card carrier thing that I keep in my backpack. So I'll collect the card and I'll put it away right away. That way I won't get distracted. I'll put the new card in there, and then I'll go through the settings to make sure that the settings are the way they're supposed to be, and then I'll format the card. Of course, double checking to make sure I changed the card. Again, you'll probably only make this mistake once, and then you won't make it for a while, or never again, hopefully. And then I'll look at the old card that I collected from the camera, and I'll check to make sure that my daytime pictures are good, that my nighttime pictures are good, that it's still in focus, that there isn't anything going on with the camera. And then I'll trim the vegetation if necessary. I'll arm the camera, and then I'll leave. A tip here, I always number the back of my cards with a silver Sharpie. This way my SD cards are all numbered, and I know which camera this card went into or came out of, and when I'm downloading my data, I can refer to my data sheet, and these numbers are recorded on there. Because I deal with a lot of cards, it helps me to keep it straight. But I think if you're just using a few cards and there isn't labeling on them, you won't really know if you took the card out that you wanted to and you put the right one in. It's just another safeguard to get the right card in and out of the camera. So if you haven't had a chance, or you're not using a card reader or tablet to look at your pictures on site, then you're gonna plug that SD card into your computer when you're getting ready to do your download. My laptop that I use actually has a port for plugging the SD card in, and if your computer doesn't have a port, you probably need to get a USB card reader that you plugs into your computer, and then you'll be ready to go. As far as naming my pictures and my folders, I keep it pretty straightforward. I'll create a folder, and then I'll name that folder with the date that I set that camera up, and the date that I collected the card, and then also the camera location number. And this is a format that we've been using. It works really well because it keeps everything in line. Excuse me, it's sequenced as far as date. So I go year, month, and day. So this camera, or this data set, was set up 2020, and it was March 10th, and I collected it 2020, and it would have been April 25th, and it was an A1 location. So as far as getting the images off the card onto the computer, I usually just select all, and then I'll grab and I'll drag them and I'll drop them into the folder. At this point, I will rename my pictures, and my pictures get renamed the same as the folder. And then before I close up the computer or move on to another card, I always like to screen through all of my pictures to see what I have. And when I come across a really good one, I'll copy that picture, and then I'll put it in a folder that I've created called highlights. I suggest that you do this too. Even if you're just getting started, you don't have many pictures, before long you'll have a lot of pictures. And you'll want to be able to find those highlight pictures without having to dig through all the data sets. And so it's something that I suggest that folks do. So after I've downloaded the card, it still has all the images on it. I archive those, and I don't delete or format the card right after I downloaded them, because it's just kind of a safeguard that if something happened and maybe something happened to the pictures when I downloaded them, or I can't find them, or maybe I forgot to download all the pictures off the card, that I can at least still have one chance at salvaging that data. And so I don't format or delete until I put the card back into the next camera for use. Here's a picture of an amazing picture of a mountain lion. This, besides being a super cool picture, the camera setup is actually set up in line with the trail. And so this is kind of something that you might get when you set your camera up with something approaching, or if the animal's going the other way. And this log underneath this is a really it's a really great feature because now the cameras are sensitive enough that I'm getting mouse pictures and fence lizards, and they just love this kind of structure. So I'll get a lot of daytime lizard pictures, but also at nighttime I'll get mice and rats and things running up and down this stick, and it really makes for some really great pictures. The next one is you want to watch it. It's a pretty short video and it's going to go quick. So here goes. All right. So that's what happens to a lot of my cameras at Pepperwood. The bears, especially the young ones, when they first start growing up, they really like to mess with things. And because I like that so much, I'm going to show it one more time. So here it goes. All right. See, I kept finding my cameras on the ground, and I really didn't know what was going on because, as you can see, that was a nighttime picture, and when something's that close to the camera, it's just a blur. And that's why I set up some cameras on video on my cameras for my project to see what was going on. Like, who was the culprit? Here's another video on one of my research project cameras. This picture, even though it's in the afternoon and it looks maybe a little bit washed out, that's actually because the camera is actually pretty old. And you know how your headlights on your car start to get foggy and they need to be cleaned off or polished? That's what's going on with this one too. This is actually a sow, or a mother bear, with 2 of her cubs. And prior to this, I was following this sow around, and she had 1 cub, and now there's a 2nd cub there. So things are always changing. I never quite know exactly who's going to show up. This is a really cool picture we're excited to have. This is a post-fire porcupine picture after the Tubbs fire. Prior to this, we had some porcupine pictures, but they were nighttime pictures and they were in black and white. So we just happened to get this one. It's really good to know that this animal survived the Tubbs fire, and to finally get a daytime picture that's actually in color was pretty amazing. And this is just one picture of a series of about 7 or 8 as this porcupine was walking around in front of the camera. As you probably noticed, that most everything you saw so far in this presentation was bears. And just to show that there's other things besides bears at Pepperwood, I've posted up some other pictures here of different species that we get. Most of these are from Pepperwood. The top center and the bottom left are from Modini Preserve in Healdsburg, the 2 raccoon pictures. The bottom right, the badger picture, that I didn't actually take that picture, but with a face like that, how can you not post something like that in your collage? I mean, I think that badger is just adorable. But this is just kind of an illustration of some of the really cool pictures that you'll get. And of course, you know, I screen through, you know, I have terabytes of images. And so I have to screen through a lot of pictures that aren't really so spectacular to finally get to some that are really neat. But I maintain 40 cameras on 2 different grids, so I'm collecting a lot of data and I'm looking through a lot of cards. Here's an illustration of some nighttime pictures that have pretty good flash in them. And the top center one, I don't know if anybody's aware, but that is a spotted skunk. We do have those around here, and it's a little bit smaller than your striped skunk. And every once in a while they'll show up, and they're a really neat critter. Of course, we have our coyote on the left, and a mountain on the top right, and that's mountain lion is actually doing that scratch thing that I showed you earlier, where it's actually scratching with its paws and creating a bare spot, and then marking in that spot, and then moving on. The bottom right is a picture, a pretty good nighttime picture of a fox. And I've actually seen on pictures, and we talked about behavior, that a fox come in and sniff one of these mountain lion scratches, rolled in it for a little bit, and then marked on it and then left. I see a lot of this animal interactions different species. I've seen, I've seen birds on the backs of deer, and just all kinds of really neat things. And of course, birds too. I do get a lot of bird pictures. Here's just a couple. The turkey vulture in the top left is just, I think that bird was just showing off, because this is like a picture of about a 50 picture series. That turkey vulture was grooming and lifting his wings up and walking around. The two pictures on the right, the acorn woodpecker, I see them quite a bit. And on the bottom left is a young turkey. I do get a lot of turkey pictures. And ravens. Ravens are super photogenic. The one on the bottom left actually looks like it's dancing. And then the picture on the bottom right, this was a series, a long series of these all these ravens coming in and walking around. And then on the top, you can see where they all kind of take off and fly off together. Another example of just, really amazing things that you can get with your camera. You just never really quite know who's going to show up and what they're going to do. This is a map created for critical linkages.
Stephen, I just want to pop in real quick. We've got about 15 minutes left on the clock, so
okay.
I think we're good on time, but you might want to.
All right, great. Yeah. Thank you, Holland. So this is a map of Sonoma County and adjoining counties. The red polygon or little spot in the middle is where you see Pepperwood. This is a map that really shows what they call core areas. It's a place where animals can reside and have all the resources they need without going anyplace. And then the light yellow, is actually what they consider to be corridors or areas that are still intact where larger wildlife can actually move across the landscape from one core area to another. And it just happens that Pepperwood lands on one of these corridor areas. And so we're really interested to see if Pepperwood's functioning as a corridor, or is it functioning as a core area? And it turns out that it's a core area for a lot of the smaller species, and a lot of the larger species are passing through. Here's a map of Pepperwood's layout of my grid. The yellow dots are camera locations, and they're lettered with letters and numbers. As you can see, there's 20 of them at Pepperwood, and then they spill off onto our neighbor's property. Our neighbors were kind enough to let us set those cameras up there. And these cameras, like I said, I visit these every 6 weeks and collect data. This map shows Pepperwood on the bottom, the blue outline, and then on the top, you'll see a red outline, and that's Modini Preserve. So Pepperwood was set up in fall of 2012, and then the Modini Preserve project or grid was set up in May of 2013. We can actually make comparisons between these two camera sites or test sites, and we can see, what are they functioning the same? Do we see animals more or less at different ones? And also, how are they affected by this Highway 128 that goes between the two, and all the different land uses that are creating fragmentation between the two preserves. So the Wildlife Picture Index, just a quick summary. Like I said before, they're set up on a 1 kilometer grid, as the little picture in the top right shows. It's an internationally recognized method brought to us by biologist Sue Townsend, and it uses the protocols, like the cameras settings are set a certain way, and the cameras are set up on a wooden stake, and it's very uniform. So this same protocol is actually used on other Wildlife Picture Index projects. There's one in Marin, there's a couple in Napa, so this area is really doing this. Pepperwood's fortunate to be the first set the first grid up in Northern California, or excuse me, North America. So we're really excited to be being the pioneers in this area. But the data can help you to determine biodiversity over time, and it's statistically robust, which basically means that because of there's so much effort and it's such a large sample size that you get a higher confidence level when you do the analysis. On the bottom is the citation. for O'Brien, who's actually kind of responsible for the WPI. Just a quick workflow. So this is what we have. So the cameras are on a grid, and then I go out and I collect the data from the cameras, and then the data is cataloged. Pepperwood has a program where we have Santa Rosa JC interns from the Mesa project. It's a paid internship where they come and they look at images and they identify species. So it's really been a part of citizen science or community science engagement with that. And then the data goes off to Morgan Gray, who's our environmental analyst, who's doing our analysis for our project. And through that, we determine occupancy estimates, which is basically what's the likelihood that you're going to see any particular species on these cameras at any given time. And then once that's done, and then we can make comparisons from season to season or from preserve to preserve. Here's a picture of the first picture we got of this particular cub and this sow. I've actually been following these two bears, and this bear, the cub now, is just about dispersal age. Here's a bear that's grazing. It's not the one that knocked that camera over, but bears are omnivores and seems, harmless enough. But this bear is actually a little bit mischievous, and you'll see in the next video. What happens when a bear messes with your camera? In the second video of it, the bear is actually standing up on its hind legs, reaching up. Fortunately, that camera just was a little bit askew, but it continued to take pictures after that. And so that pretty much concludes the presentation for this workshop. Appreciate everybody attending, and I'm happy to take any more questions.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Love those last few bear videos. We did get a few questions come in as you were speaking, so I'm going to read a couple of those off. And then again, if you have more questions, you can type them into the chat. We've got about 10 minutes left to end at our, what we said, 11:30 stop time. So if there's anyone on the call who has other things you have to get off to, I want to just say thank you. And we will be sharing this recording with everyone who registered after the fact, so you can go back through and get that information. But let's hear a few more of your questions. Again, also, if you would like to share your question using your voice, you could click your raise hand icon so I know you have a question. And also, if you have questions that come up after the fact, you can email them to Stephen. He has shared his email address here, and we will also email that out to folks after the class. So let's see here. So Stephen, Debbie is saying in her backyard, she placed a camera in a place where there was several scat, and at first only saw the tail end of animals, was only getting like butt shots as they came through the area. Then she faced it in the opposite direction of what seemed like an apparent path. But does that seem to also does that happen more in natural open areas compared to a backyard setting?
I think it really depends on what you mean by backyard, and like a lot of houses they back up against wildlands, and I mean some backyards are in the city. Yeah, quite often we get pictures of just the tip of a tail or an ear, and sometimes that's all you're going to get. If you're able to move your camera around, that's a good idea to do. But as far as always being able to get a full view of the wildlife, sounds like you were up pretty close with your camera, so maybe back your camera back a little bit so that you have a wider angle of view, and you might get more.
Great, and we also had a question wondering if you could please repeat the name of the camera you suggested for birds, like a feeding station camera. Could you repeat that?
Sure. It's a Bushnell Nature View, and it's actually green in color. And if you go to TrailCam Pro and you look through the Bushnell cameras, it'll be displayed there. That camera is about $300 though.
And going off of that question, someone was also wondering if you could share a few recommendations of cameras in a range of prices, you know, a good cheaper camera and, you know, a few examples going up in the range of prices.
Sure. I think probably the lowest level camera that I would use would be the Bushnell Core or an equivalent, and that's about $140. And from there, cameras just kind of get more expensive. The Core DS that I'm using, which actually PhilCam Pro said it gave it like its best camera of 2019 overall. It's $200, and then they kind of go up from there. You start getting into some of the Reconyx cameras, which are pretty high-end cameras, and then you're up around, you know, five or $600.
Great, thanks. Another question. Scott's wondering, has there been any ringtail sign at Pepperwood?
No, we haven't, and we keep waiting to get a ringtail picture at Pepperwood. You know, everything seems to be right for it. We have the right kind of vegetation communities, and I mean, Modini Preserve is only 6 miles as a crow flies away from Pepperwood, so it's a pretty good proximity to what, you know, could be good habitat and possibly have them here. But as far as right now, no, I just have the 3 pictures, which is 1 detection, and then over in Napa, they got some ringtails also.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And Jazzy comments, ringtail sign is hard to detect. They really like Toyon and mistletoe. And another question we had here, what are the advantages and disadvantages of cellular cameras?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and I'm actually still kind of learning about them myself. It's probably the disadvantage would be the cost that is occurred for having a cellular service. But I think being able to remotely look around to see what's going on is certainly a plus. So without having more experience with it, I can't really say the downfalls or what's better. However, I have noticed that the batteries really last a long time in mine.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today for our first virtual class. Thanks for being part of our community. We really appreciated having you here, and we wish you all the best of luck on your camera endeavors.